Dear Ajahn, thanks for the Dhamma talk. Do you have any advice to stop the unstoppable bad karma that has arisen or is going to be arisen? Thank you.
I'd say probably number one, be patient with it. We've all made bad karma. Even the Buddha had to receive the results of his own bad karma while he was alive. So be patient with it, but then try to receive it with some mindfulness and wisdom so you don't create further bad karma. And that's the whole point of the practice. You're establishing your mind in generosity, morality, mindfulness, insight into the Four Noble Truths, the three characteristics. This is so that whatever comes up, you treat it correctly and don't let this old karma as it arises cause you more, be a cause or a factor for more suffering. So, for example, you're meditating and your leg hurts. Just notice that with mindfulness, pay attention and then reflect. Oh, there is pain. It's a feeling, what we call mindfulness of feeling. You can be mindful of a painful feeling, but you don't have to create aversion or mental agitation out of that. When you're mindful, you can just know something and let go. Or somebody insults you or criticizes you, insults you in some way. You can know that with mindfulness, but you don't give in to anger. You just know what's being said. You may know why, what the cause is, but you just let go at that point. You don't create anger, aversion, form a grudge, want to seek revenge out of that. Or somebody else seems to be successful in life, more successful than you. Be happy for them, rather than giving into jealousy and making yourself, putting your mind on fire, setting fire to your mind by giving into jealousy at that point when you see or hear that they've done well in some way. Just be happy for them. Practice mudita. Now, this is what we call Dhamma practice. There's always a skillful way to deal with what comes up, or the unskillful way where you feed more mental defilements, negative emotions, and you suffer. This is the whole point. This is the practice of the Dhamma. You're taking personal responsibility. So you can't wipe out the past karma, but you can understand it and know it as it arises, but don't create further bad karma through your actions.
Next question. Why is it difficult to see neutral feelings? Is equanimity a form of neutral feeling?
Well, feeling in the most simplest way for contemplation, we have pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and feeling that is neither pleasant nor painful, or what you call neutral. Three main feelings that we experience with every moment of sense contact. So it could be physical, based around the body. It could be just based on a memory or a thought. Also is accompanied by mental feeling. Neutral feeling is difficult to see or to be aware of because it's neutral. It doesn't stimulate you very much. So they say when you're not mindful, neutral feeling tends to stimulate dullness. So if you're meditating, you're not particularly mindful, but your body and mind sort of calm down because you're sitting still for a while, your eyes are closed, there's not a lot of sense contact, sense information coming to your mind. It's very easy to fall into a state of dullness, either drowsiness or just dullness, where you're kind of numb to the world for a while. And usually that's because there's a lot of neutral feeling around in your body, your mind, and there's not much going on. So your mind goes to sleep or hibernates, becomes dull. So that's not really equanimity. Upekkha, we say upekkha vedana, upekkha meaning a neutral feeling, but it's not equanimity in the sense of when you're mindful, equanimity comes up in the purest form would be fourth jhana. When you enter fourth jhana, it's purified by this perfect mindfulness, continuous mindfulness, and accompanied by equanimity. There's not even the normal bliss and pleasure of samadhi. It's just a very cool, calm, still equanimity of mind. So that's different. For one who's attained or developed strong mindfulness, equanimity is a subtle form of, it's a pleasant thing. It's not pleasure because it's not a pleasant feeling, but it is a desirable experience. It's a good experience, and it's a good experience because there's no stimulation or agitation of mind. The mind is still calm. So that's the purest equanimity, fourth jhana, when your mindfulness is very continuous. But even just practicing mindfulness in daily life, you'll notice there are times when your mind is not particularly caught into extremes of aversion and pain, bliss and pleasure. There are plenty of moments in the day when the mind is just in a more neutral state. Physically in the body, like if you send your attention around your body, you'll notice that it's not like your whole body is in pain. Of course, it can be if you're very ill or something, but normally there'll be many parts or aspects of your physical presence that are not either pleasant or painful. There's a lot of neutral feeling going on in your body. You just don't notice it. But if you practice mindfulness, you might do it as a little practice, as an investigation sometimes. Investigate the neutral feelings of the body, just to give you an example of what it's like. You put your attention on any part of the body. I don't know, could be your face, for example. So you close your eyes, put your attention on your face. Well, you may notice some parts of the face may feel quite pleasant, but some may feel unpleasant if you have any kind of tension, muscle tension. And then there'll be parts that feel very neutral. You can barely sense them. And that's the nature of neutral feeling, isn't it? It's very unstimulating. So you miss it. But if you're mindful, you may notice there are these neutral feelings around the body. So be aware of them and don't let them lull you into dullness and a lack of mindfulness, because that's what they tend to do. And the same with the mind. When you don't have a lot going on, you're not thinking a lot, you're not really high and excited and stimulated or happy, you're not particularly angry or averse or you're not having any particular strong emotions. Observe how the mind, when you're not mindful, slips towards dullness because of the neither painful nor pleasurable feelings. This is something to work on, to be careful of, how to be aware of and see the danger that sometimes neutral feeling can just lead to dullness. They say the animal realm, they have a lot more dullness than humans. They're less intelligent. They have a lot more dullness. So partly is there's just this neutral feeling all the time for an animal because there's not a lot of stimulation. They haven't learned to entertain themselves in any particular way. Unlike us, animals don't sit there playing video games all day. They're eating grass or running around eating something or other. Their life is fairly ordinary, fairly, you might say, boring. So there's a lot of neutral feeling. So there's a lot of dullness. They're not mindful and they're with this dull feeling a lot of the time. And even that humans, we have that side to us. We can go dull. Like the mind, the computer mind just goes into hibernation when nothing much is happening. And so you see that when people, they're trying to meditate and be mindful when they're meditating, but they often just fall asleep through lack of stimulation, and they have to work to get beyond that. So the equanimity of one who is mindful with a well-developed mind is not the same as the feelings of neither pleasure nor pain of just ordinary existence. And there's a difference there. That's something to note and be aware of, to investigate.
Sadhu Luang Por. Another question. Dear Ajahn, females in my family, sisters in particular, all seem to be rather bossy and aggressive, and they enjoy beating each other up in speech. It's hard not to feel uncomfortable when even just spending a little bit of time interacting with them. How should I do? Thank you, Ajahn.
Go off and live in a monastery. That would be one solution. If you're not ready for that, then you're going to have to be very patient and compassionate. Maybe first thing I always tend to encourage, like, say you notice faults in someone else, the people around you, your sisters. Do you have those faults? Because really it's their job to change themselves. You're not going to be able to change them very much, but you can change yourself. So do you have the tendency to be bossy? Was it bossy, aggressive? Do you have those tendencies? That's where you've got to practice. Work on yourself first. And with them, just be very tolerant, compassionate. If they're really being aggressive, well, avoid them where you can, but you won't be able to always avoid them. So you just have to be very patient. And if you know what they're like, well, you can be ready. When you're with them, you know they're going to be bossy, aggressive. Well, be prepared for that. Develop some strategies, how to respond wisely in the situation with loving kindness, patience. Try not to provoke them and make them worse than they are. But come back to yourself. The number one priority in practice is to come back to yourself and say, you probably also have some aggressive, bossy tendencies, because we all do, all unenlightened beings do. I know some more than others, but work on yourself. Practice a lot of compassion for yourself and then spread it out to them. And you do the best you can in the place you are, the situation you are. If you're seeing someone else being bossy and aggressive, well, look at them, try to look at them, with mindfulness in a detached way and say, well, what does it do to them? Does it make them truly happy? Probably not. They're probably insecure, probably have some regrets, maybe a lot of self-aversion, maybe they're not very happy with themselves, but they can't help themselves, so they keep falling into this habit perhaps. Try and look at it in a detached way so you learn something from the situation and you turn it to your advantage. But then come back to yourself and see what you can do to fix yourself. And by the way, men can be bossy and aggressive too. But maybe men are sometimes more physical, not always, but sometimes more physical. Either way, bossy and aggressive men are going to be suffering. Bossy and aggressive women are going to be suffering. So see the suffering of this and try and come back to yourself, see the craving, the attachment that underlies this behavior, and see if you can fix it in yourself.
Sadhu Luang Por. Next question. Dear Luang Por, thank you for sharing the Dhamma tonight. In terms of karma, do groups or nations suffer the consequences of past karma, good or bad? For example, would present-day Australians or English suffer the resultant karma of killing or oppressing the early indigenous populations? Or does karma only affect the individuals concerned? Much obliged for your advice.
Well, generally speaking, karma is an individual thing. Each individual has to be responsible for their actions, and their actions will come back to them, good and bad, in different forms, depending on the intention and the kind of karma they made. So it's possible you could be living in a country that does something as a group, the government, the leaders, the government decide to go to war, for example. But you could be living there saying, I don't want anything to do with this. I don't agree with this. And you may cultivate kindness and compassion, even though the majority of people around you are going to war or being aggressive or whatever, exploiting others. They may do that. You may not as an individual. So karma is still an individual thing, and it will depend on your actions, your intentional actions through your life and in past lives. And so, sometimes people say, when there's a problem in a country, it's the collective karma of the people. Well, there is a certain part of our individual karma that relates us to other people, in the sense you may share certain views with other people, certain common interests with other people. So it brings you together, and you may make similar karma together, but actually it's still a very individual thing. As far as exploiting, hurting, killing native populations in the past, well, that was past generations. You can't be sure where you were your past life. A lot of people don't even believe in past lives, but if you do, you can't be sure where you were unless you can remember your past lives, and very few people can. So even though historically we remember and we have records that say in Australia the indigenous population was exploited, harmed, suppressed, hurt, killed, doesn't mean to say we personally were doing that. But we experience some of the resultant karma in the fact we're living in Australia. I live in Australia now. So I'm part of Australian society in this day and age. So these issues come up. People have their complaints and suffering based on past karma, past actions of previous governments, previous people occupying the land. So it will affect current modern day society. There will be a certain amount of karma where you're living in Australia because you've chosen, either being born here or you've chosen to live here. You're going to experience some karma to do with this issue. But again, it's up to you as an individual how you deal with it. So whether if you are prejudiced in your behavior, that's going to create negative karma in this day and age for you, and it's going to probably not make you very peaceful. You have a lot of anger, and it will come back to you in different ways. Whereas if you're more compassionate, sensitive, understanding, that's a different kind of karma. That's your karma in this life, in this moment, in this day and age. That's the important thing. As far as previous generations, what they've done, well, the world history is full of wars and oppression all over the place. We may have participated in oppression, but we don't know, so we can't do much about that other than learn lessons from the history books, maybe. But we can learn to live our life skillfully right now, right here. So again, it's a bit like the last question. If you are concerned about previous oppression of Indigenous people, well, that can motivate you this life to be sensitive and kind and compassionate where you can to Indigenous people. Be aware of some of their collective grievances and some of their suffering. Do what you can not to prolong that suffering for them. See what you can do to be tolerant, kind, helpful, fair in this current society that we live in. That's where the place of practice is in the present moment. And that that's the important thing, isn't it? To cultivate the good qualities that the Buddha would have encouraged and our teachers encouraged. And as far as the past goes, we can't go back in time and fix that. So we have to work on the present and cultivate the skillful qualities in the present.
Sarulingpo. Next question. Namo Buddhaya. I am from Indonesia and want to ask, what is meant by piti? Thank you.
Piti, we translate as rapture, joy. Sometimes they translate it as zeal, meaning you're really interested and enthusiastic in what you're doing. So in more worldly situations, you can get this kind of quality arise. You know, you might call it a positive emotion. It's a physical feeling as well as a mental state. Say your favorite sports team scores a goal or wins in some way, you might get a wave of rapture. You're joyed, you're overjoyed. It doesn't usually last very long, and it's fairly worldly. It's based on some kind of worldly outcome. Your team won, or you doing business and you sold a lot of things today, so you're happy. That kind of thing. You know, there's all kinds of worldly situations which may generate a bit of enthusiasm, joy, but it's usually not that long lasting, and often it doesn't lead on to wisdom or spiritual, deeper understanding of the Dhamma. It's more of just a temporary pleasure in your experience, perhaps. Then there's what we call the Dhamma piti. As part of the Dhamma practice that we do, one of the results is that as your mind develops skillful qualities such as mindfulness and insight and virya, effort, and tranquility of body and mind, various qualities coming together brings us a lot of joy, but it's based on the Dhamma, based on understanding Dhamma, wholesome states of mind arising, whether it's in meditation or listening to Dhamma or helping other people. There's a number of different ways piti can arise or is stimulated. This may have certain similarities to the worldly sort of happinesses and pleasures people get, but at some point they diverge in that the causes for Dhamma piti are much more refined and more spiritually meaningful causes, such as when you meditate, body and mind settle down, you may have a lot of enthusiasm. Just simply watching the breath, you can become very enthusiastic, joyful, you enjoy it. And it's very important. We call it the food for the heart as opposed to the food for the body. Just like when you're hungry and you eat food for the body, it makes you feel good. Food for the mind, Dhamma piti, arising from meditation, insight, and the arising of wholesome states of mind. It's food for the heart. It satisfies the heart, keeps you going, brings you a sense of energy, you want to carry on practicing, you're not bored, you're not restless, you're not caught into anger and aversion. When piti arises in terms of Dhamma practice, it's the opposite of aversion and boredom. So it's a very important quality. You might ask, why can people meditate? It seems so boring. Oh, well, maybe they're having some piti arise. Why do people listen to the Dhamma or reflect on Dhamma or practice vipassana? Why can they do that? Oh, maybe it brings them a lot of joy. The mind lightens up. Another aspect of piti is we call it the buoyancy of the mind. So it means like your mind is uplifted, has an uplifting quality. Just like if you're floating in the ocean, you need a life vest, life belt or life vest, something that will keep you floating above the water so you don't drown. Piti is like that. It helps your mind to come up and not drown in the suffering of life. It's a very important, necessary quality. It's a part of the practice. But it tends to be the result of your efforts in the practice. It will arise. It's not something you can just command and say, I want pity, unless maybe you're skilled in meditation, then you can meditate, calm your mind, and pity will arise every time. Not, you don't need to see it in that kind of way. It's more just like if you're practicing, it will arise as a good result, a welcome result from the efforts of your practice. So it's something you learn about and find out about as you practice the Dhamma, particularly meditation, but not only meditation.
Sadhu Rinpo. Next question. Dear Lumpur, I would like to know when we should feel contented and when to go beyond and be greedy for a breakthrough. How to balance between the two. Thank you.
Well, one part of Dhamma practice is you're observing your mind, what's going on, what is leading to what, your karma again. So if you notice you're becoming too greedy, desirous of results, breakthroughs, special experiences, special insights, you want to be enlightened, and it becoming an obstacle, it's counterproductive, then obviously you need to change your approach. So that's something you need to observe as you're practicing. And it's not just you observe once either. It's kind of a constant thing that you're aware of, and you're aware of the danger. And so regularly you're observing, am I becoming too focused on just getting results? Is this desire causing me a lot of frustration? Because that's one telltale sign, isn't it? If you really want something, even a spiritual goal, you want to be enlightened, you want to be free from suffering, you want a peaceful mind, you want samadhi, you want wisdom and insight. Okay, you want all these things. But if it's causing you frustration, be careful, because that will lead to disappointment, despair, maybe may lead you to give up the practice, which is the very opposite of what you want. Sometimes we get angry as well. You get angry because you desire something so much. You want to have a peaceful meditation. You want a concentrated mind. You want to have clear insight, and you haven't got it yet. So then you get angry with yourself, with others. Maybe you blame someone else, and that's common. Blame the teacher, blame fellow practitioners, blame the place. Sometimes you blame yourself. Oh, I'm no good. I can't meditate. I've got no merit. Blame yourself, become depressed. So look at cause and effect here and see, well, the more you cling to your goals and your desires for success and achievement, the more you may be laying the causes for suffering. So if you are suffering, that'll mean you're attaching somewhere, and you have to go back and look, well, what am I attaching to? And maybe you need to adjust your approach and maybe let go of it and say, oh, I'm just going to meditate, whether I'm peaceful or not, enlightened or not, I'll just do it. I'm just giving you a very simple example here. You just change your approach, let go a little bit, and carry on, rather than just got to get it, and you're becoming too compulsive about the whole thing. So you have to find balanced effort, balanced attitude, use right view, use some reflection to help you, guide you as you're practicing. You have to be very patient, because there will be times when practice seems to be not going very well. Be patient with that. Don't give up. But don't get too lost when things do go well, because that's also a problem. Think you have a good meditation, you're very peaceful. It's like, this is great. And then around the corner is still some suffering waiting. And then you feel really crushed when the suffering comes back. Life is full of ups and downs. It's very uncertain. So remind yourself of that. It's not sure. Ajahn Chah said, if you feel you've got enlightened, just bring up that voice that says, oh, it's not sure. Maybe I'm enlightened, maybe not. And that will keep you grounded.
Sadhu Rinpo. Next question. Dear Ajahn, Can devas practice the Dhamma?
They can if they've got faith, but if they don't have faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, then they probably won't practice the Dhamma. Just like people. So, devas are beings who have died who have good karma, and anyone can make good karma in all kinds of ways, not just Buddhists. So it may be someone who's a deva who's Buddhist or from some other religious background, or maybe no religious background. So devas are just like people. Some practice, some don't. But they can practice, they can have faith. But there's certain obstacles for a deva, and that is very pleasant. It's like being on holiday all the time, receiving the fruits of past good karma. We say the fruits of your merit. So that can make you a little complacent, can't it? You can sit back and like, oh, I've made it. I've got everything I need. It's a bit like, you've made your $10 million, you got your money in your bank. So you just sit back and just sort of hang out. But have you ever noticed when people just sit back and hang out, often things go wrong because they're not using their mind, they're not trying, they're not developing themselves anymore. Sometimes they go backwards, they become stressed again for other reasons. It happens like that. So, devas could become complacent, are heading for more suffering without realizing it. So, just be aware of that, the desire to have that kind of heavenly rebirth and can just sit there, have a nice rest, not do anything. Okay, that's good temporarily, but long term, it's not the same as Nibbana. There's still suffering around the corner.
Saralungpo. Another question. It's a bit of a long one, so I'll slowly read it. It is easy to see cause and effect in our current time. If you cause harm, you can see its effects in your own guilt, pain in seeing that being suffer, etc. If you cause happiness, you feel an ecstatic joy, satisfaction, etc., i.e., there is abundant evidence instant karma is real. However, I find it impossible to be convinced of karma that carries through to a next life. How do we get the evidence that links an innocent baby afflicted with terminal cancer to something bad that baby did in their past life? Shouldn't the default be that that baby has cancer solely by biology, statistics, and probability?
Yeah, it's a very important question. The Buddha said if you don't believe in past life, future life, you can just practice focusing on this life. And like you said, you can see karma at work in this life fairly easily in your own experience and that of people around you. So really, that's all you need to practice the Dhamma. But as you continue practicing, maybe your experience will expand to understand a little bit more about cause and effect from the past and into the future. Mainly because if you're focusing on your mind from moment to moment, day to day, you can see karma at work, like you say, and you can see this whole process of cause and effect continuing, the different factors, the different causes and conditions. It's a certain energy, and it's a certain has what we say a conditioning effect on your mind that doesn't just stop just like that. Even though the physical body does, when you die, the physical body breaks up, but the karma you've made doesn't just disappear. And that's something you can get to see and know and understand in this life, I would say. You can understand the karmic nature of your body and mind, what we call the five khandhas, how feelings and of pleasure and pain, and your experiences are generated by past actions. You can the more and more you practice, contemplate this, I think you will start to see how at least the possibility from continuing from life to life. But at the same time, like you say, if a baby is born with illness or suffering, unless you have the psychic ability to know past lives and what has led to what, you don't know. But there's maybe not a lot of need or reason to speculate on that. The important thing is help the baby, isn't it? Get the baby the best treatment and care and love that the baby can have to deal with their problem. And, unfortunately, sometimes babies die. It's very, very common if you study the statistics. Lots of babies die in the mother's womb or at childbirth or soon after birth. Mothers die as well. That's part of the bigger, broader picture of living in the human realm, is that it's fragile. We are subject to illness. Babies are subject to illness. Old people and young, healthy people drop dead as well. Things happen. It's not all easy living the life of a human being, because our bodies are fragile and they can be affected by so many things. And on top of that, human beings, we're so ignorant that we don't wait for people to die of illness and old age. We start killing each other in wars, which is amazing. Why would we do that when we already are going to die anyway? But anyway, this is the nature of the human realm. It's fragile. And so, unfortunately, babies will get sick and sometimes die, as will everyone else. It's part of that's as I said, it's the bigger picture of samsara, in that there's a very clear limitation of human life. It's subject to birth, aging, sickness, death. And that was what prompted the Buddha to look for something that is not subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death. Nibbana. That was his kind of that was spurring him on. What isn't subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death? So if you experience the pure mind, what we call the unconditioned, you get an insight into that which is not conditioned, that which is not subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death. And you can do that in this very life. So anyone who develops the Noble Eightfold Path, develops insight, abandons craving, attachment, if only partially, can have an insight into the unconditioned, and they can see, there is something beyond birth, aging, sickness, and death. So, as I said, number one priority with anyone who's sick, baby or older, is care for them, look after them. But and on another level, you also have this reflection. You see someone sick, then you say, this is my motivation to practice more, because we can all fall sick. We all have to die one day. I should practice more, and use it to spur you on in the practice.
Sadhu Lumpo. Next question. For lay people who have no husband, no kids, no money, do they need to worry about getting older and no one taking care of them? How do we solve this problem?
Well, I mean, it's a very general question. I don't know your specific details of your life, but the more you practice the Dhamma, the more you develop this inner refuge of skillful qualities and hopefully some peace and happiness from your Dhamma practice. Then these more external issues, material issues, I mean, they're all important, of course. We have to eat, we have to get by in the world, of course. But the more you develop the Dhamma, the less you worry about things like you've been saying. Obviously, as a monastic, an alms mendicant, a monk or a nun, you have no money, you have no possessions. You just trust in the practice, in the Dhamma, and You can't demand anything, even from other monks. You live in a monastery, you can't go to the rest of the monks or nuns in your monastery and say, I demand health care, I demand this kind of treatment, care, whatever. You can't. You just wait and see. If you fall ill, hopefully something will happen. But you don't know, do you? And occasionally you're in a situation where maybe nothing happens and you just have to endure. Ajahn Chah, our teacher, told of a number of occasions where he was literally at death's door in the forest, maybe with malaria, with no medication, no help, and he was prepared to die, even to burn his monk's ID book so that anyone who found him wouldn't have the burden of having to do a funeral for him, because they wouldn't know who he was and they could just bury him in the forest. He was ready to die. He didn't die at that time. He eventually came back, started a monastery and became a world-renowned Dhamma teacher. But he got to that point. And many Dhamma practitioners do get to the point where they think, well, maybe they'll die and there's no help and you've got injuries or illness. It does happen. So you have no guarantees, but you trust in the Dhamma. And that trust in the Dhamma is a very powerful thing that tends to bring forth help, maybe, or at least the qualities you need to get through the situation. Or maybe you'll just die, but you die practicing the Dhamma, and there's a certain satisfaction in that. So I know that's a big ask if you're a lay person. Maybe you haven't practiced Dhamma much. I don't know your situation. But as a general guideline, trust in the Dhamma, develop the Dhamma. If you have a lot of money or no money, try to keep the 5 precepts. Try to learn the Dhamma, listen to the Dhamma and learn how to meditate. Try to cultivate kindness and compassion in daily life. And these qualities, the good karma you generate and the good qualities you're generating in your mind, will sustain you through any material difficulties. And, we just don't know, even if you're very wealthy and well looked after, you may still have a very difficult illness to go through in life. It can happen. Or you can be super poor with no money and no help and not have much physical difficulty, physical illness to go through. These things depend on karma. There's no absolute guarantee, but you deal with your karma by practicing the Dhamma. That's the important thing. And I've met lay people being very poor with almost no property, money at all, but have been very happy through their Dhamma practice and coped with their old age, their sickness, very well, because they've learned the Dhamma, they've learned how to meditate, be mindful, reflect on the Dhamma, cultivate sila, which generates them a lot of happy memories and good feelings. And they use that to face whatever difficulties, such as illness, they have in their life. So I'd always say, practice the Dhamma, and the Dhamma, they say, one who practices the Dhamma will be looked after by the Dhamma. Good reflection.
Sadhu Luang Por. Are there any more questions? It's our last question, Luang Por. No more questions.
No more questions. So very nice talking to you tonight. We wish you well with your Dhamma practice, and might not see you for a few weeks because I have a few other commitments, but eventually there will be another Zoom session, but not next week. So we wish you well.